welcome to our Wellbeing at Work podcast series. My name is Laura McAtee, and I'm the Employee Engagement Manager at Workplace Options. In today's episode, I have the pleasure of welcoming back Irene Zande, founder and executive director of Kidpower International, where we'll talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Irene is an internationally recognized social emotional safety skills expert in designing and implementing in-person and online programs that protect kids, teens, adults, including those with special needs from bullying, abuse, harassment, domestic and relationship violence, assault, and abduction. I want to also mention that WPO has partnered with Kidpower International to be a part of our impact project this year. This year's theme is called Empowering the Future, which will focus on putting the spotlight on emotional and physical well-being of people of all ages. Through this partnership, Workplace Options employees and members, clients will have access to Kidpower's resources, including all their wonderful workshops, online training courses, and tip sheets that cover various well-being and safety topics. So with that said, hello, Irene. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much. So we'll go ahead and jump in. I know our first topic is talking about DEIB, breaking that down and what that means to you. So what does that mean to you? When you hear DEIB, what goes off in your brain? What does that mean to you?
Well, at Workplace Options, you have a wonderful culture where the term DEIB is deeply embraced: diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Unfortunately, in many places, including some people in North Carolina, there's baggage that has caused many terms to become politicized in negative ways. And this is one of them. So we uphold completely the values of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And we're very strategic in how the language we use, because in some cultures, like at WPO, we can just use it. But in other places, it just doesn't work. And so we made a decision to have universal words like kindness, respect, safety, and fairness, because those can apply to everyone and they allow us to meet people where they are. The strategic use of language that way allows us to be relevant in all languages and all cultures while still upholding the values and behaviors that DEIB represents. So let me give you an example.
Yeah.
We had a workshop where a child protection advocate from Nigeria told me, Irene, stating openly that we welcome LGBTQIA plus people could cause me to go to jail. And so I asked her, well, could you tell people that we each have the right to be treated with safety and respect and the responsibility to act safely and respectfully towards ourselves and others? And she said that she could. And we then discussed how she could give examples of specific behaviors in ways that were relevant and safe for her with the group she was teaching. So it's not that we ignored the issue, but that we accepted the reality of her situation. And that's what I mean by meeting people where they are.
Interesting. So you just reframed it to fit that specific situation or culture.
That's right. And to give her something she could use within that context that was still about the same things.
Interesting.
And we take a very broad definition of respect, by the way. We think that it's respectful is not respectful to pay people differently for the same kind of work. Okay,
yeah, well, I think that's important, and I'm glad you brought that up in reframing the words that you're using, or even changing the terminology to meet people's needs. And like you said, we meet them where they're at. I mean, we've even had that happen when we're, discussing DEIB in that acronym, or people say EDI or DEI. People use that in many different ways and even use different terms in that. Like I've heard DEIB where the E is equality and not equity, or the B is being and not belonging. So it's important, like you said, to frame the context and explain that to people before getting started, which really quickly I will break down what we mean in terms of DEIB for the listeners, because that's an acronym we use specifically at WPO. Other people, like I said, might use EDI or DEI. So I want to quickly explain what those mean. So when we talk about DEIB, diversity, I always break down as, the many facets of diversity that make humans unique, right? So we have race and sexual orientation and sexual identity and age and religion and ethnicity and neurodiversity, and the list goes on. There's probably hundreds. So that's what we mean in terms of diversity. Equity refers to the fair treatment of everyone. So ensuring that norms, practices, and policies and culture ensure that the identity of someone is not predictive of workplace outcomes. So that's the difference between equality and equity. Equality assumes everyone should be treated the same, but equity acknowledges that not everyone starts from the same starting line. They don't have the same opportunities. And then inclusion is all about bringing people into the table, making sure everyone has a voice. And then belonging, I always like to say that's kind of the end point. That's your goal, right? If you have diversity, equity, inclusion, then hopefully you have belonging. It's almost like E equals MC squared. DEI equals B. Belonging is all about the feeling, being valued, accepted, and celebrated, and having that culture add into the company, letting people be their authentic self. It's almost like the emotional state. I think that comes from being successful in DEI. So I just wanted to state that quickly, that that's what we mean and the definitions of what we mean when we're talking about DEIB. In short, diversity is the differences, equity is about equal opportunities and access, inclusion fosters that sense of belonging, and then belonging is hopefully the goal of all of that coming in. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone listening.
It really does make sense, and it's fantastic that you're doing this. I think it really shows leadership and gives an example for other companies, and even if they don't use the same words, that they uphold the same values and insist on the same behaviors.
Yeah, and like you said, you just have to shift it, based on your audience and, what company you're working at. It might work for you, or you might want to use something else, or like you said, use totally different words like kindness and respect, that are more universal. So let's move on. I guess let's talk about how organizations can create an environment where everyone feels inclusive.
Inclusion. Yes, of course. Inclusion begins at the beginning and it goes throughout an employee's time at the organization. Long ago, I applied for a job where the cubicles were open so you could hear the other interviews from the waiting room. And I heard, yeah, I know, it was a long time ago. It was in Congress, actually. I was applying for a job to be an assistant.
Wow.
Yes. And I heard the young men being interviewed talk about their experience. And I thought, I have a great chance of being accepted. I've got even more experience. Unfortunately, the only question I was asked was, can you type? And I said, well, you didn't ask the men before that. They said, well, the congressmen prefer girls who type. So I knew right away that working at that place was not for me. And this story shows how exclusive or unfair behavior can start even before someone has been hired, before the interview even. The forms we fill out, the ways we're asked to evaluate ourselves. Yeah. And so we want to think about people's entire employee journey. How do they experience your website? What about your social media? How are people communicating once they're hired in meetings or on email? And does somebody take the time to learn to pronounce your name? Ask people. The best way to find out something is to ask people, even if you don't like the answers, and even if I know some people will take advantage of something to, ventilate about about something that is not relevant. And yet creating the space is worth it, and you can set boundaries when somebody, doesn't use the system the way it's supposed to be used, or the question. Ask, do you feel included? Was there anything that made you feel less comfortable or less welcome? And what changes would help you feel more included? And that valuable data will help you to inform the changes you might need to make. It's interesting to realize that when changes are made to create more DEIB, it actually benefits everybody. A wonderful example of that is sidewalk ramps that were designed for people using wheelchairs and are now preferred by most able-bodied people.
That's a great example. And unfortunately that happened to you, but it set you on the path to Kidpower. So I guess good and all. But that's a really great point to bring up, is thinking about it from the beginning and, starting from even the recruitment process and the onboarding process. Do you have the right language in your job description? Are you making your application process, easy for anyone of all different abilities and all different learning types? Are you asking questions in, a way that allows an equitable process? Are you giving opportunities to people to answer? Like you just said, are you asking the same questions to everyone, giving them those same opportunities? Are you putting your, DEIB strategies in onboarding and providing training? I mean, everything you just brought up, I think that's really important to consider when you're looking at creating an inclusive environment, is starting at the beginning and not only doing that, but making sure it continues through the process and you're meeting people where they are. That's exactly right. That's it. And how do you think, switching the focus, I guess, to international organizations, right? How do you feel like multi-organizations can approach DEIB from a global perspective? And when there's so many, like you said in that example earlier, so many different cultures and so many different perspectives that are built in. Do you have any advice there? We need to be, again, realistic about what happens in that culture and work from there. We have to accept that there are constraints in terms of the environments people work in different cultures. And so we keep in mind the context of what we're doing. How we communicate matters. In many cultures, words, how you sound and how you're behaving counts much more than what you actually say. Yep. So the volume, your tone of voice, your body language, and to not judge, because when we approach people through a lens of judgment, then there's a way of making them less than we are, for being different, for coping with things that we don't know as much about. So instead, it's important to go from a place of curiosity. Why is this person having a very different experience of our conversation than I am? What makes this hard for them? How can we build a bridge between where they are and where we are? One great saying is that all relationships move at the speed of trust. Oh, I love that. Yeah. And that in order to inspire and motivate people to work effectively, regardless of the culture, we need to show that we care about who they are. And there's a lot of times in Western culture, there's a straight line between, okay, we've met, here we are, let's get started. In many cultures, it doesn't go that linear, in a linear fashion. It goes, hi, how are you? How's your family? Is that picture on the wall of your vacation? It's beautiful. And have you had something to eat? Yeah. And then you get down to business, right? And so what we want to take at least a few minutes, even in a very linear culture, to check in personally with people before getting down to business. Because when people believe we care and they see us acting consistently with respect and kindness and compassion for what their situation is, this builds trust. I absolutely love that. That example resonates a lot, I think, with myself or a lot of people at WPO, because we're an international organization. So I constantly have conversations with colleagues from every part of the world. And in America, this is just me personally, I'm so go, go, go. Like I'm, more individualistic, and I'm so concerned about my priorities. And it is important to take a beat, and remember that building personal relationships is one of the most important things, not only in the workplace, but in life. And that's how you're going to be successful. And that really resonates with me, because I often do have to remind myself that it's okay, to take an extra 10 minutes when I'm talking to someone to learn about them and ask about their experiences and make a personal connection before diving into, the topic of that meeting or whatnot, because that's what makes the difference, for yourself and for them, and especially across cultures, understanding them, asking questions. Like you said, I think one of the parts of DEIB is just being comfortable, not being comfortable, ask the questions, be okay. Maybe if you're wrong every once in a while, not a one size fits all, so it's all about, I think, approaching it from the idea that you might need to ask a little bit more questions to get the information you need. Yes, absolutely. And cultural competency means asking, observing, and then learning. That's it. We can also see people doing something differently
Sometimes people don't feel comfortable telling us directly, especially in some cultures.
Yep.
And so observing is also an important part of this.
Yeah, and taking the time to try to educate yourself, right? You know, kind of empowering yourself in that way.
Exactly.
And then if we're jumping in the future a bit, how do you see, DEIB, EDI evolving over time in organizations, now versus maybe 5 years, 10 years from now?
Well, demographic trends are changing companies. Mm-hmm. Employees are having fewer kids. We all have a lot more anxiety about climate change, war. Mm-hmm. We have the effects of trauma from the pandemic and the isolation that was caused by that. We have more diversity and more openness about diversity. And we also have more political trends with fear about the changes, about DEIB. So we're in a very politicized time. I really believe that WPO's focus on employee well-being, including promoting the values and behaviors of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, will help organizations to meet these challenges. And organizations that are prepared to meet these challenges will do great because they will keep their people, they will be productive, and they will also be relevant for their customers. The ones that don't are constantly going to be putting out fires, losing good people, having endless meetings. So we have to accept and embrace change with humility and joy as we're listening and observing the needs of the changing workplace.
Yeah, I think change is a key word there, right? I mean, I feel like companies, they attack this like a fire. You said they're like, oh, we're years behind, or we haven't done what we're supposed to be doing, and now let's panic and try and do 100 things at once, right? And that's a normal human response. But sometimes it's about taking a minute, absorbing, reaching out to your employees, seeing what they need. That phrase we keep saying of meeting your employees where they are and taking things slowly. DEIB is a roadmap. It's not a checklist. It's not something you can say, great, we're diverse now and we're done, or great, we have a policy, we're done. Like, these are things you have to take slowly, and you have to be intentional with your actions and make sure that you are creating a plan that's going to last, and you're going to make updates, you're going to make changes as needed, and be okay with that, instead of going in and saying, oh, let's fix 100 things at once, because then you're going to make mistakes. It's better off to, like you said, look at change as something that might be years long versus something you have to tackle in a 1 month period.
Exactly. And to embrace uncertainty.
Yeah.
We just have to, if we can embrace uncertainty, we can stay in the moment as we look to the future and work towards the future we want.
Yeah, uncertainty. It makes you uncomfortable, but it's a reality, right?
Right.
And then let's talk about taking, how do you take something as broad in scope as DEIB is? Like, what a acronym, right? I mean, there's tons of things that are lumped under there, and break it down to be more comprehensive or understandable for an organization.
Well, you can look at it in terms of policies, practices, and people. Mm-hmm. Policies are what we put into writing. They're structural, and we want to think about it not just the DEIB policies, not only those, but also what are our policies throughout the company, and are they consistent for a dress code or leave for when you've had a child or for an ill family member? How do you make things equitable in that context? Practices is how do we actually treat each other? What are we doing? Who do we invite to have coffee or to join a chat group? Mm-hmm. And who don't we? And then people are the human, carbon-based entities. And what are we saying and doing, and how are we saying and doing it? And where Kidpower really focuses is on skills that help you to uphold your policies and practices that, support DEIB, and to address behavior in the moment with people. So I wondered if you could think of an example that we might show or demonstrate what a practice looks like that might come up in a company.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, one I can think of is using the correct pronouns, right? I mean, it's a very easy assumption to make off the bat based on someone's appearance, in the first half a second of meeting them of what their pronouns might be. And there's kind of the binary look of it, of there's she, her, and there's he, him, which in reality, someone's pronouns might not be what you think they are, right? They could use they, them pronouns, non-binary pronouns. So that is one example of something that is uncomfortable when you first come into that situation, but something that is fixable and a learnable moment if you look at it the right way. So we can use an example of maybe you're trying to invite me to a meeting and you refer to me with she, her pronouns, which I do go by she, her pronouns. But let's say for the example that I am non-binary and I use they, them pronouns. So if you go ahead and invite me to a meeting, I can show you what that might look like.
Great. Okay. So I really want to include Laura in our meeting because she's great.
So I just want to tell you before we send out that invite, I do go by they, them pronouns. I do identify as non-binary. And I just want to inform you of that moving forward. That way you're able to refer to me correctly moving forward from now on.
I'm sorry. And thank you for telling me. I shouldn't have made an assumption.
There you go. Perfect example, right? You took the information. It's uncomfortable maybe for a second, right? It's uncomfortable when you get corrected. You might feel embarrassed of, I shouldn't have assumed. But you apologize and you said, I will do that moving forward. And that was a maybe 30-second interaction, but now you know how to address me moving forward, which is so important, right? We want to make sure to address people correctly and make them comfortable. So I think that was a great, just small snippet of something that happens daily, probably within the workplace.
Right. And the reality is that most people don't like being told what to do and might react defensively.
Yep.
And that's why we teach people to persist in speaking up for themselves and in setting boundaries. So suppose instead of, and we have people practice staying calm, and listening and responding appropriately. That's one part of the practice. The other is, what do you do when somebody doesn't? So let's just imagine that instead of doing what I did and would do, I said, what do you mean, they, their, them? I don't understand this non-binary business. So what would you say to that?
Well, it's hard to answer, I guess, because I have not been in that situation myself. I have been in situations where I do have, a friend, or maybe I had a family member that uses non-binary pronouns, they, them, where I felt the need to interject, which I think that's important too, is if you're even away from that individual, it's not okay, for them to be referred to with incorrect pronouns. So I always, take that chance as a learning moment. And it's definitely uncomfortable. I'll say that, I don't want to stand here and act like I, am the one answer all and I'm trying to teach them everything in the span of a 1 minute conversation. But I think taking that opportunity to say, I understand, let me take a moment to explain to you why they, them pronouns is important or what being non-binary means and use that as a time to educate them and hopefully switch their point of view. Obviously, that's not always going to happen. There are people who will never use the correct pronouns. They don't want to do it. They don't want to be educated. They're not going to absorb that, and that's okay. Our job isn't to make everyone make a change in that small interaction. But I think empowering yourself to at least address that is important, but it's not always going to happen. I am not here to say that you have to, take that time to educate them because that's not everyone's job. But I think at least, trying to take that stance is useful, and being uncomfortable with the uncomfortable. Like I said, not everyone's going to want to absorb it, and, that's okay.
And it's possible to persist in setting a boundary without actually trying to educate the person. For example,
that too.
You might say, I understand that this is confusing for you. And our policy here is to respect people's pronouns. So please try to do your best to refer to me as they, their, them.
Yeah, because it's not everyone's responsibility to educate, right? I heard that a lot in the DIB space, especially people that, may be transgender, or they don't go by something that you automatically assume off the bat. And it's tiring, right? It's tiring when you're in that position to be like, okay, let me take the next 5 minutes to explain to you why I'm a human being and this is important. But that, that doesn't always have to be the situation. You definitely are okay to be like, I'm not going to sit here and do that, but please do try and be respectful moving forward and leave it at that.
Yes, that's it. And usually if you persist in a way that doesn't shame or attack somebody, just says, I understand it's confusing. You're building a bridge before you set a boundary.
Yeah.
And that does help people to accept more easily. Doesn't work all the time, but it works more of the time.
Yeah, I think that's a great example though, because I see that as something that can come up regularly, but just a word of advice for everyone listening, the best rule of thumb is to always ask, right? Ask when you introduce yourself or use your pronouns, and then that almost incentivizes them to introduce their pronouns as well. That way you don't have to assume and you can use, their correct pronouns.
That's great.
So moving right along, how do you measure DEIB efforts, like ROI wise, or how do you know you're being effective?
Okay. So what if we don't measure something? I'm in the field of prevention. How do you prove that something bad didn't happen? What we really want to see is progress and results. And sometimes trying to measure something that's immeasurable gets in the way. The best way to tell that you're making progress is to look at your policies, practices, and people and notice what is and is not working. And constantly work, as you said, to make things better. That's progress. And you can often tell how people are feeling about your progress by asking them. If you have to do a measurement because it's required by some of your stakeholders, then you can do snapshot polls every 6 months. How are we doing in terms of our policies, our practices, our people? Are there things that need to be changed? Are there resources that we need to have? How do you feel about the strides that we are working so hard to make?
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. I mean, at WPO, we do use engagement surveys, our NPS score. But like you said, I feel like even just getting feedback means you're probably moving in the right direction. If people are comfortable, they're going to speak up, right? So if they're coming forward or if they're giving you feedback on a survey or, as you said, maybe it's unprompted, but they feel comfortable saying something in a leadership meeting or, bringing something in front of the board, then you're probably doing something right. You're creating a space where they feel okay to do that, regardless of what actually comes out of their mouth. You're making a space where they feel included, where they feel comfortable to voice a contrary opinion, which that's when okay, we have a sense of inclusion, we have a sense of belonging because they feel comfortable to even open their mouth, which not everyone does. Not everyone feels like they have space at the table. So I agree with you. I think just having that opportunity and not necessarily measuring it. I don't know if that's always the answer, but, there are ROIs and things you can do if you do want to measure it.
I know. The rate of reporting bullying goes up after we do a bullying prevention workshop. And that's because people are recognizing that it's bullying and they're getting help for it. Yeah. And that is progress. So sometimes having more complaints can be, and some of them are misguided, but most of them aren't. And then having a good structure for addressing complaints in ways that are fair for everybody. But really giving yourself the time to listen to people again, rather than go only by, some artificial form of measurement.
Yeah. And I like what you just said about prevention too, because I think often, especially in the HR world or, the DEIB space, it can be very reactive, which we want to be proactive, not reactive, right? So ideally, which is hard to do as humans, but ideally when a complaint comes up or something might happen, thinking, okay, like let's immediately deal with that, right? It might need support in the moment, but now that we have that, now we know maybe there's a need for a certain training or a need for something prevention-wise that we can inform our staff of in advance rather than waiting for something to happen again or waiting for the next problem. So being more, like I said, proactive rather than the reactive stance.
Yes, that's great.
And then what best practices do you recommend for organizations to ensure that DEIB is part of their cultural framework?
This has to be in the air, the fabric, and the culture of the organization. It's not something, just as you're talking about, it's not something that gets whispered about or complained about occasionally behind people's backs. You talk openly about the behaviors and the values that are represented by DEIB. Making space on an ongoing basis to say, for example, at maybe the 3 minutes at the end of every meeting to evaluate whether what happened was aligned with the values. Did we do anything in this meeting that undermines DEIB? Was anybody treated in a way that undermines our values? And then is somebody and then get specific or notice, you could have things that happen. Is somebody talking over somebody? Are there people who aren't doing their share? They're the same kind of people who end up volunteering every time to take the notes or to take on the extra work when it isn't specifically part of their job. And when you have to keep doing it, as you said, because when new people join, you have to keep doing it. People forget, things get dropped, new people come, leadership changes, and leadership matters. The examples that people set who are in positions of leadership shape the whole organization. I was once with a women's health center where they were dealing with abusive behavior by the partners of some of the clients in their waiting room. And through the course of this, we were practicing how to set boundaries, to have a sign up that just like you have signs for cell phone, don't use cell phones here. Saying here, we're going to be speaking and treating people with safety and respect, and we're not going to use violent, threatening, or abusive language. And then it comes out that one of the doctors was really bullying the nurses in this clinic, yelling at them, berating them, cursing at them. And when I brought this up privately with the director of the center, she said, yeah, but she's from New York. She can't help it. And I said, that doesn't work. You can't. You have to address this, because how can you tell people that they have to follow a set of values that somebody in a position of leadership is not? And she did. It was uncomfortable, and she did. So that's walking your talk, and some of it is to make it ordinary. Just make it ordinary. Of course, we're going to respect each other's pronouns.
Yeah.
Of course, we're going to keep things fair and really look at it when somebody says something is unfair. Even if we disagree with them, we may, in the process, learn something. And one example I had of this was a mom that told me that when I was a Girl Scout leader, she said, the thing I loved being in the Girl Scout troop, and the thing I loved the most is that you made it ordinary for Sarah, my daughter, to have two moms. And making it ordinary, because in that time, her daughter was not allowed in school in her second grade classroom to make two Mother's Day cards. So you make it ordinary. You just say, of course, this is what we're going to do. And I love what you do, Laura. You're very great in your enthusiastic, positive way of making it ordinary. Of course, people are going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Of course, this is hard. And our value is to do it anyway.
Yeah, I love that. Of course, it's going to be hard, but we're going to do it anyway. That's a phrase I'm going to use moving forward. And I could not agree more. I think putting it in place, again, like we said at the beginning, before someone even starts, set the priorities before they start. Talk about your culture. Talk about the idea of an inclusive workforce and what that looks like for your company versus the company they were at before. What sort of norms do you use? Like, what sort of practices do you use? What happens if something is uncomfortable? What are the steps do they take to address that? I think that's all important to almost set the standard, when they come in, and outside of the workforce too, just in life, and what Kidpower does with, empowering kids and people of all ages to use the tools that they have and strengthen their minds and strengthen their ability to protect themselves and protect others is so important, because it starts when you're young, right? I mean, especially when I'm my age now, it's so much harder to feel that. Or maybe if I got the education when I was younger, it'd be easier, to have that mindset if it's built in from the beginning.
Well, that's the goal.
Yeah.
And throughout your life, one of my favorite stories was the woman in the senior center who said, I'm 94 years old, and this is the first time somebody has ever taught me about boundaries. And I'm so glad I'm learning it now.
You can always learn, always learn.
Never too late.
Before we wrap up, I do want to, thank you so much, Irene, for all the support you've given WPO with our DEIB efforts as well. Throughout the year, we have all these monthly celebrations. I know we've been going back and forth about that, and all the support you've given us with right now with Black History Month and Autism Awareness Month coming up and Pride Month and all of those wonderful celebrations. We're so thrilled to be able to share your content and share your resources on those employee-specific monthly topics. Especially the content geared towards our parents. Here at WPO, myself, I'm a parent and I find your content insanely useful and I'm excited to use it. As my son Owen grows older, I'm using it now and he's only 1, so I can't imagine how much more useful it's going to get. But I really just, appreciate all the support you've given us. And I do want to take this opportunity to highlight Workplace Options Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Program Services. So if you click on the link on this podcast page or contact us to learn more about how these services can benefit your organization. Thank you so much, Irene, again, for your time and for sharing your insights and experiences. And to our listeners, we hope you found this discussion insightful. Until next time, stay safe and be well. Thank you.